Hello, this is the help video for the 1.03 quiz converting between percents, decimals, and fractions. So please use this help video to help you prepare to take the quiz, or if you are about to take your second attempt, please review this video before trying to complete the quiz for a second time. So on this quiz, we are covering the standard NSO 1.2, which is rewriting numbers. So we are going back and forth between mixed numbers, fractions, decimals, percentages, in order to solve real world problems. At this time, please go ahead and open up that 1.03 quiz. If you're waiting for another attempt to be opened, you could just watch this video and then apply the information once that quiz is reopened. Of course, you can find this quiz under either content or grades. Either way, you can access the quiz. So the very first question, and again, the questions aren't going to look exactly like this. Obviously, the numbers will be different, but this will be a good starting point for you so that way you can work on solving these on your own. So the steps will be pretty similar. So our first question, convert the following percent to decimal form. So we have 48.2%. Now, when we're converting between a percent and a decimal, we are moving the decimal space 2 spaces depending on which direction we need to go. So if we're starting as a percent, that means we're going to go towards the left. Another way of doing this is dividing by 100, which is also an option, but I like to just go ahead and take that decimal point and move it 2 spaces. 1, 2, plot your point. If you ever have any blanks, then you would replace it with a 0. But in this case, we did not have any blanks. That decimal point moved 2 spaces over. And that means that our new decimal is 0.482. So that is how you convert between percent and decimal. Now, our next question is converting between fraction to a percent. Now, it's important to note with fractions and percents, when you're converting between the two of them, if you look at the image above, you'll notice that decimals are in the middle of fractions and percents. And what does that mean for us? Well, that means there's not a great straight shot way to convert between a fraction and a percent. So we want to go to baseline first, which in this case is decimal. So what we're going to do if we're trying to go from a fraction to a percent, if you look, you're going to have to stop right here in the middle first at decimals. So let's first convert this to a decimal, then we can work on converting it to a percent. If I want to convert this fraction to a percent, I simply divide my numerator by my denominator. Now, this may look super complicated, but don't forget you have access to your calculator for every question in math this year. So go ahead in your calculator and divide 10 divided by 47. And what do you get? Well, you get actually a giant number, which I am going to go ahead and type out here for us instead of writing it. 76596. Okay, so that's what I got when I divided 10 divided by 47. So now that I have converted this from fraction form into decimal form, that means I only have one step left. And that final step is going to be to convert from decimal to percentage. Now, moving from decimal to percentage means I'm moving my decimal point 2 spaces to the right. 1, 2, and plot my decimal point. And so let's see what this looks like. This looks like 21.27656. Now you'll notice on our question, it says round to the nearest hundredth. So rounding to the nearest hundredth means I only need 2 spaces after the decimal. So this is the number I am looking at. And the number to the right of it is higher than 5. So that means this number is going to go up 21.28%. percent. And we can see that on this example, that is option D. So again, whenever you're converting between a fraction and a percent, first find the decimal form, then you can convert to a percent. Trying to just go from fraction to percent, there's no clean way to do that, so it does involve an extra step. All right, this question is about Peter, and you can see that we have a little bit of a word problem here. So, and we have a mixed number. So Peter's pet pig weighs 23 1/3 pounds. What is the equivalent decimal value for the pig's weight? So we have 23 1/3 is the number that we are looking at here. And so we need to convert this to decimal form. It says, what's the equivalent decimal value for the pig's weight? So there's a few things we can do here. The first thing we can do is if we have 23 as a whole number, we automatically know that that number can go in front of the decimal point because 23 is a whole number and any whole number goes before a decimal point. So automatically we can go ahead and cross out A. Because 2 would not be the right number to put in front of the decimal point. So now what we have to worry about is that little 1/3. So again, how do we convert a fraction to a decimal? Just like we talked about on that last slide, you are going to simply divide numerator by denominator. So in your calculator, divide 1 divided by 3. And what do you get when you divide 1 divided by 3? Well, I know what I just got, and I got a crazy number, which looks something like this. 0.33333333, and it goes on and on. So if you remember back to class, what do we call a number that has a pattern that keeps going on and on and on and on for as long as we can see? Well, if you look at this graphic up here, that is called a repeating decimal. So we need a clean way to write a repeating decimal so that way every time we write it, we're not writing a million threes at the end of it. So the easiest way to do that is called the bar notation. So instead of writing 0.33333333, I'm going to find the number that keeps repeating. In this example, the number that repeats over and over again is the 3. And so I am going to place a bar on top of that 3. Again, this bar notation indicates that that number repeats over and over and over again. So now let's look at what we have here. We have this whole number of 23, and then we have this 1/3 that we've converted into this fraction or to the decimal of 0.3 repeating. So at this time, I need to combine the two of these numbers in order to create a final number. So 23 plus 0.3 repeating gives me a final answer of 23.3 repeating. So that means that C would be our correct answer here. Now, question 4 is interesting because it is actually multi-choice. So that means more than one answer is correct in this scenario. So the question reads, which of the following statements are true? Select all the correct answers. So I'm just going to quickly go through all of these. You're going to find that some of them are correct. When you see a correct one, go ahead and select it. When you see an incorrect one, go ahead and exit off. Like I said, more than one answer on question 4 is correct. So looking at A, we have 1/2, 50%, and 0.5. Are those all equivalent? So what I'm going to do in order to solve this is I'm going to use that baseline of a decimal as what I compare everything to. So let's see, does 1/2 equal 0.5? That's what I'm going to look at first. Yes, it does. If I divide 1 divided by 2, I get 0.5. So far so good. Last one I have to check, does 50% equal 0.5? Move that decimal point 2 spaces. Yes. 50% equals 0.5. So yes, A, all 3 of those are equivalent. Now I'm going to go to B, and I'm going to change my color just so we can keep this clean. Again, I'm starting with that decimal as my baseline. So I'm comparing everything to 0.3. So first I'll do the fraction. Is 1 divided by 3 equivalent to 0.3? Well, not quite, because 1 divided by 3 is 0.33333, right? Or 0.3 repeating. So that's not great. Let's also look at the percentage just to double check. And is 50% equal to 0.3? No, we know that it's not. 50% is equal to 0.5. So B is not a correct answer. Let's go ahead and move to question C. Now, wow, this one looks very similar to A, but what's different? So 1/2 is the same, but they're comparing 5%. Let's talk about why this one is wrong, okay? We already know it's wrong. 5%, if I'm going to convert this, I have to move the decimal point 2 spaces. So watch what happens when I move that decimal point 2 spaces. I have that gap there. That means that in decimal form, 5% is actually equal to 0.05. So no, it cannot be equivalent to 0.5. So C would be incorrect. Let's look at D. Again, we can see that 50% and 0.5 are not equivalent. And so let's look at our last one, E. Again, starting with 0.1 as our baseline. 1 divided by 10 is 0.1. So far, so good. And then finally, we have 10%. Convert that to a decimal. 1, 2, plot the point, and that is equal to 0.1. So our correct answers here are A and E. Again, use the decimal as your baseline. That's the easiest to convert in between, and then compare to make sure all three are equivalent. And this is our last question here. So this is a word problem, and we're going to see who has more money remaining. So Stephanie and Jasmine both earned $80 for completing chores last month. Stephanie spent 1/5 of her money, and Jasmine spent 25% of her money. Who has more money remaining? Okay, so we need to see who still has the most amount of money left over after all of this. So let's go ahead and figure this out. First, let's compare 1/5 to 25%. Again, we're going to return to decimal as our baseline. So let's convert 25% to a decimal. And I'm moving that decimal place 2 spaces, 1, 2. So 25% is equivalent to 0.25. Now, what about 1/5? I have 1/5, which is equivalent to 1 divided by 5. And when I divide 1 divided by 5, I get 0.2. So what is a bigger number here? Who spent more? Well, 25 is a bigger number than this 0.20 over here. So we know that Jasmine spent more money. So if Jasmine spent more money, then who has more money remaining? If Jasmine spent more, that means Stephanie has money remaining, more money remaining than Jasmine. So that's how you would answer question number 5. Again, return to baseline of decimal form. Decimal is the easiest way to compare between the three forms. So that is our quiz review for 1.03. In this week's worth of work, you do have that IXL skill and the quiz. So after you're done watching this video, you can go ahead, make sure that you have completed that IXL video and assignment, and make sure that you complete that quiz. Reach out to us if you have any questions.